my name is Joanna Pop. I'm an assistant professor in sociology at Tilburg University, the Netherlands. And today, together with my colleague, we are happy to have Ido Hartogson. I think I said it almost
Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, as guest for a talk about the concept of set and setting. And Ido has elaborated on this idea of the individual, but also a collective set and setting in his book, American Trip, How Set and Setting Shaped the American Psychedelic Experience.
Throughout the conversation, we would like to go into several topics relating to set and setting, including current social issues, technology, psychedelics within the knowledge society, and frameworks of interpreting the psychedelic experience. But before going into substantive topics, we would like to know more about your motivations, Ido. Do you have a personal or professional objective in the broader sense? And what is your motivation to get into the topic of set and setting in particular?
Well, that's interesting. You know, like a lot of the researchers in the field of psychedelics, I mean, that's the open secret that a lot of them were also personally touched by this kind of experience. And I can say that the psychedelic experience had a deep influence on my life on so many levels over the years. And when I started my master's degree in the program in Science, Technology, and Society, where I currently teach at Bar-Ilan University, then one of the things that I started writing about, you know, psychedelics as a technology, and the nice thing about science and technology studies is that you can think about almost anything as a technology, and psychedelics are definitely, they're molecules, they're produced in labs, they're used using different techniques, and one of the things that guided me beyond my interest in, you know, in thinking about and exploring the implications and meanings of these really extraordinary tools is just also in the sense of one of the things that guided me to the topic of set and setting specifically was that this really resonates some of the topics in both in the study of technology as well as in the study of media. In the study of technology, there's a lot of the discussion is about the different ways in which technology shapes society and culture, and in which society and culture shape technology. And that is really something that we see with set and setting, which is by definition the way that, you know, that all of these extra pharmacological elements get inside the picture, enter the picture in a person's experience with a psychedelic compound. And then more generally in thinking about media, and I'm very drawn to a school in media theory that's called media ecology. And in this school that has some of the more well-known names in this field are people like Marshall McLuhan and Neil Postman. And they speak a lot about how media are like environments, and about how media shape our experience in the world. And in this sense, that's something that also reflects the topic of set and setting, because when we think about set and setting and we see that it's kind of like, it's really, it's a reflection of the world, of the environment that we're in. So it resonated for me, some of the key questions, both in media studies and in technology studies, and those, I mean, to think about it more and more.
That's so interesting what you were saying, because when we were asked to go through the participants and to choose someone that we would like to interview, for both of us and independent of each other, you know, we directly chose you, and because this idea of the set and setting being like a reflection, not necessarily like a reflection, but being influenced by the more general context, cultural, social. For me as a sociologist, that's so obvious. And
Right.
it seemed to me so nice and elegant that somebody actually put it, on the paper.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's something you're right. It is obvious. And what isn't shaped by the society and the culture. And it's really, it's interesting in a way that to talk about these issues is novel in 2020. And really, it's not that novel in the sense that anthropologists were also discussing this 60 years ago, but somehow the discussion about sense setting has always been focused on the individual level, on the concrete, specific level of who you were with during the experience and where you were with, but not on the broader social and cultural context. And that's one of the things that I try to, that's one of the main things, or the main thing that I try to address in my book. And perhaps one of the reasons why it wasn't done more often, both psychedelics weren't that much on the radar of scholars for many years. That's one reason, but another reason is that it's quite a daunting task. I mean, trying to figure out how an entire social and historical period shapes people's experiences, concrete experiences with psychoactives.
Mm.
That's something where it's difficult to know where to begin with, and the potential for failing seems immense. So I didn't actually start with such an ambitious project. The book is based to a large extent on my PhD dissertation, which was more about the way that set and setting shaped the results in research schools in the 50s and 60s. But then as you turning this project into a book, you find yourself, okay, suddenly I want to tease out the really big implications. And if you want it to really be captivating,
Yeah.
then you want to go for the big fish. And so I took all my chutzpah to try and do it, and I hope I
Yes,
succeeded.
you definitely. It was a very, very nice read. Maybe before we start, because I'm not sure if the viewers of this recording are familiar with your work. Maybe you can summarize just like in, like general line, what is this idea of individual and collective set and setting?
Right. So I would say, people know about sense setting. I think if they're coming to a conference like ICPR, so they probably know the concept and the idea that our experience with a psychedelic compound is shaped by the set, by who we are, what expectations and intentions we bring to the experience, etc., and by the setting, where we are, who we're with, and the cultural setting, which is already something that people are less aware of, maybe, or that's less popular to talk about. So if you think about this idea, and then you have this other idea that kind of recurs sometimes when you read about the 60s. People say the whole 1960s were like this one collective trip that the whole of America took. And so I think the premise for the book is something like, okay, what if they take this idea that's usually given as a kind of aphorism that nobody takes? I mean, people say it because they believe it's true, but nobody really means it, tries to show it. The book is about trying to figure out, okay, what was the set and the setting of that collective trip, and how did the set and the setting, if we think about that trip as being unique, like any other trip by different individuals is unique, the American trip of the 50s and the 60s as different from psychedelic experience of, I don't know, the Aztec people in the 14th century or whatnot, then what was the setting, and how did that contribute to shape the experience? And that's the premise for the book.
Right.
So,
no, please.
yes, please. No, I was just wanting to say that we discussed, how to go about from here, because we had so many things that we would like to talk about this. And so in the end, we decided we will go with JD's idea to start a bit more general. So that's why, I will give the word to him actually now.
And so you introduced this idea quite nicely of a particular time, creating a particular set and setting for a particular trip that people go through. And so I would like to turn the attention to the recent global events, and starting with the impact of and spread of COVID-19. The media has endorsed the use of mostly small technology for communication. So what kind of implications does the replacement of organic channels of communication and knowledge transfer with small technological channels bring with it?
The change from organic communication, you mean a non-mediated, non-technological, non-digital?
Just like we are talking here through Zoom and not on the conference.
Right.
What are the implications that this time brings with it?
Well, first of all, it's interesting in the general sense, the ways that these different cultural moments shape our experience with psychedelics, and COVID-19 definitely has the potential to contribute to a sense of paranoia, or the whole enhanced surveillance and the whole purity and danger thing going on, where you never know if you might get infected, or maybe you're infecting somebody, which is maybe even worse. So definitely, I think when the culture is more anxious or outraged or polarized, as we're seeing it these days in many places, then this has an impact on people's psychedelic experiences. And some people said after Corona that they're refraining from tripping, they're stopping with these experiences, and also this makes sense in a way. Now, if you think about tripping in this digital world, or through these mediated channels of communications, I would say don't do it. I think that's I mean, I don't know. I guess anything can be nice, and but there's something about the psychedelic experience that's really so so unmediated, so this strong sense of connection. And I would think, I mean, I haven't really tried it, but I would think, and I mean, there is this whole history, of course, of psychedelics and virtual reality, and going into virtual realities on psychedelics, and that's fine. That might be quite awesome, maybe. But I think this experience, if I think these digital media of communication, they seem to be quite inadequate, or lame substitution a lot of times. And well, if they're used wisely, they can make a substitution for specific kinds of things, events, maybe a conference.
Yes.
But I would say for a psychedelic trip, don't do it. And I saw that people are, for example, there have been some ayahuasca ceremonies happening online.
Yes.
That you might have heard of. And I heard, I participated in one of these, but just shortly. But to me, I don't know, the idea that in this experience you'd be sitting and watching a screen, it's just, you're supposed to direct your gaze inwards, or be able to like to be in your body and be with somebody, be able to touch someone, and all of these channels are just completely absent there. That I would find it too um, just too frustrating. So I think it's better in most cases to just find the beautiful person next to you
Right.
and focus on immediate reality.
Okay.
Can I have a follow-up question, because there's something that you said there that uh, links a lot to this idea of um, normative kind of like context in which like a valid psychedelic experience should take place. Yes. And then because you said, you know, hey, from your point of view, you should be looking inwards, you know, you should not look at, yeah. So that already tells me that you have a certain kind of like idea about how a psychedelic experience should unfold. Yes.
Well, first of all, yeah, sorry.
No, but so what I wanted to say is also linked to this to technology is what do you think is the role of technology in promoting or propagating these ideas about how a psychedelic experience should look like, should, you know, be organized, should be experienced?
Right. So first of all, I want to take on the first part of the remark, the first remark, because I did want to, even before you started your question, to qualify what I said and say I know people that have been in these online ayahuasca ceremonies and were completely enchanted. And of course, if it works for people, I'm not the person to tell them, you know, that's invalid or anything like that. I wouldn't want to do it. And I don't think that you necessarily need to turn inside during a psychedelic experience, even though that's obviously a psychedelic ethos in a lot of psychedelic culture. But I don't think that's the only thing. But I don't. But still, when thinking about an ayahuasca ritual, I think a lot of the time it is about turning inside, specifically in ayahuasca rituals, and not necessarily always with psychedelic, but ayahuasca rituals, and definitely not sit and stare at a low resolution picture, a Zoom picture with low resolution sound. Now about the more generally about the role of technology in how do you put it in shaping
and
how
propagating specific kind of like ideas or models on how a proper psychedelic experience should look like?
Well, you know, well, one way I think technology enters the picture is that a lot of the, I mean, in my book I talk about this this feedback loop in which the technology industry was inspired to a great degree by the personal experiences that people had with psychedelics in the 60s and the 70s, and then these kinds of technological environments that appeared in through this sort of inspiration, such as 3D animation and virtual reality, and all of these different graphics and types of music that came from the electronic scene. All of that became the new environment for psychedelic trips, and I think these highly technologically mediated surroundings are quite prevalent in our culture. I don't know if people consider it to be the proper way, but obviously for many people it's the more common way, or it's the way that they're accustomed to. So technology definitely plays a role, a big role in today's culture relationship with psychedelics, and definitely more than in the past. Although even if you look at the 1960s and you see that the merry pranksters and the original acid tests featured a lot of technology, and um, strobe lights and and these how do you call these closed circuit cameras and different kinds of gadgetry that also even in the 60s was already used to frame the psychedelic experience and direct it in specific directions.
Mm. Okay. So you're talking more about these feedback loops in how technology influences the experience and the experience also influence technology. But how about, for instance, technology as a carrier of meaning, as a carrier of information, as a carrier of these discourses, about psychedelics, about what they do, about how we should look at them.
Right. Well, that makes me think about the net and the way that, for example, psychedelic our contemporary psychedelic culture is so much influenced by the appearance of the web and the way that it shaped psychedelic communities around the world and this web of intercommunication. And really, it's hard to imagine the psychedelic renaissance happening the same way without the net and the kind of the torrent of information that it enabled. And it's interesting to think about also this kind of uh, analogy that people draw often between the mycelium of the mushroom and the
Mhm.
internet. So in many ways, there was this fascination in the early days of the internet, this whole cyberdelic aspect, a fascination with technology as bringing these new ways of connecting with psychedelic realms. And Terence McKenna saying computers and drugs are two ways to change, to alter your mind. Only computers are too big to swallow yet. And so yeah, there's a deep and long story going there. Yeah.
Okay. Do you
Yeah.
have maybe a question, JD? Because I can like go on forever. So
You have gone into this topic of the internet being the collective unconscious of our time, and now being drawn to our devices, and us as a self being extended through our devices. Um, how would you how would you create this practice of thinking about what is good for ourselves? How should we approach devices within this time? Really would we go about this kung fu with the devices that surround us?
That's so funny that you're asking that, because well, you know that um, well, my other field of research is writing about technology and our relationship with technology more generally. And you used the word kung fu, which surprised me because, well, in one of my the chapters of my earlier book, which was published only in Hebrew, Technomystica, there's talk of technological kung fu and the way of building that kind of more aware more aware relationship with technology, which is something that obviously is becoming ever more crucial and relevant in our lives today. And to me, I mean, that's the of course the $1 million question. And to me, that has to pass through honing our ability to be aware of the effects that different technologies and media have on us.
mm,
and 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 in that sense, I think psychedelics, as well as practices like meditation and mindfulness, can be quite effective, because psychedelics enhance this kind of they they enhance the whole idea of sense setting is based on this notion of meaning enhancement. And I talk about that in my book and papers. And so when we have our environment enhanced and we see the effects of the environment on us so clearly as we do in a psychedelic experience, when we realize what kind of sounds or sights are really, how they're affecting us, how they're making us feel happy or maybe miserable, and then we want to have more of that or less of that in our lives. So to me, that those are things that start there, and that you can later try to integrate in many ways into your life, and it's a never-ending path. Because I've been so many of us have come to the conclusion, for example, with our phones, that we're too dependent or too clingy on them, and yet it's something that we need to develop all the time. That kung fu, as you call it, of developing the good habit in use, which is something that we can also learn a lot from psychedelic practice, from set and setting, really, because set and setting teaches us how to approach technologies in a way that's productive, safe, fun, etc., etc.
So, and relating back to Joanna's question from before, I see really you framing it as something that each person has to figure out for themselves as well, rather than there being like a strict way of going about psychedelic experience, because it depends on each person, really, or.
Right, you're talking about the really the parts of the last chapter in the book, and the most ambitious parts, I think, where I really allowed myself to go wild with the ideas. And this part really connects with that first book that I mentioned before, Technomystica, which was published 1 decade before. And this is also how, as I said, this whole book also relates to my interest in media, and 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 the idea that actually understanding set and setting means understanding your media. So I'll give one example. In psychedelic research, it's pretty well known. I mean, one of the cliched descriptions of the bad set and setting is, these fluorescent lights in psychiatrist offices or psychiatric hospitals in the 1950s, and these fluorescent lights that are ugly and that make people feel bad, especially on a psychedelic, and when they want to watch different kinds of they want a different kind of atmosphere. So, well, it turns out there is some research showing that people react badly to fluorescent lights more generally. I mean, I wouldn't write with a fluorescent light. I'm completely resistant to this idea. So in a sense, a lot of what we're um, perceiving to be negative or positive with psychedelics is we can learn through that of that it's actually there's a more general way in which it frames our experience in life, not just on psychedelics. And this tends to be, as you say, something that's not that's you can think about this kind of science where we would think about, okay, this kind of work with the body and this kind of aesthetic and this kind of sound and this kind of a mode of communication, relationship. This is how they affect me. But in the book, I suggest that I offer this idea, but at the same time, I want to say, I don't think they need to be universal. I don't think they are universal because we have different ways of interpreting these. And of course, you can create more general rules, but at the end, we each have to find our own paths of creating the environments, the media that nurture us in our lives. And to me, environment is a key thing, because really, if you make this distinction between the set and the setting. I mean, people always think about how much intention matters, and intentions is one part of the aspect of the whole story, and it's super important to have a strong intention. But at the same time, we all know how much the environment matters. And I mean, if I want to have a productive day, and I have my two kids running up and down me, I can be as intense intense in my intention. It will be difficult to reach those levels of intellectual intensity. So we need to find this balance, and I don't want to, of course, to dismiss the intention. I think sometimes in our culture we tend to say, it's all in the head, or it's all about, how you view things. But to me, it's also, I mean, in my life, a lot of what's relevant is really trying to come up with the ways that will provide the best environments for positive stuff to emerge and to naturally
Mhm.
flourish.
Yeah. And of course this has a lot this can a lot be related to this discussion about individual responsibility, and the structural kind of like I don't know, environment where we have to, we have possibilities, opportunities, and barriers for our choices and our for our actions. But um, if I think, for instance, about only about the internet, yes, nowadays we all have access all the time. Almost everybody has a smartphone connected to the internet. We have access to so much information that is in the end not really regulated and not really checked, fact checked, or something like that. So we are kind of like giving the responsibilities to people to figure out what is a valid or like information, as opposed to some kind of hocus pocus. And I was thinking, especially when I was reading your book about set and setting, and this idea about these models of how we think about the psychedelic experience. Nowadays, if you go online and you just Google psychedelic experience or something like that, you can find a lot of different kind of ways to think about it, a lot of discourses about it. And then this increased access to this information, what do you think it has, what kind of impact it has on individuals? In they have to make a choice. Which one
Right.
should I believe? Should I go for the neo-shamanistic model? Should I go for more profane science-based kind of like psychologic kind of like framework? Do I go for working with my shadows or healing
Right.
traumas? Or
Right. So the consumer or the society or the spiritual supermarket, they become relevant here as well. And in history, people usually had access just to one type of hallucinogen that was used in their community, or maybe one or two or three, but definitely not the whole bunch of them like you have today. And just one framework through which to access that to that plant. And today, as you say, there are so many different frameworks that we can adopt, and it's quite representative of a larger trend in our society, and this society of excessivity in many cases. But I think, first of all, it's interesting that a lot of people, I think, what they start with is also many times what people will continue with. And I think a lot of times also people have this kind of idea already of what they're looking for. Some people, they say, well, I don't feel like going to these ayahuasca ceremonies because they're too new agey for my taste, and I want to do it in I don't know, I wanted people just have their specific ideas about what the way is to do. Maybe sometimes they make mistakes, but there are definitely different kinds of ways and paths. And well, in my book, I have a chapter about called "Experiments in Set and Setting," and it's devoted to Timothy Leary's work and how he really experimented with more types of set and setting than anyone before or also after him in research, because he gave them to prisoners and religious ministers and to students and to artists and so on and so forth, and did this in very different types of settings as well. But and I have to say, I mean, to me, that's one of the things that are really interesting about psychedelics. I mean, excluding such horrendous sets and settings, like whatever, you can take the extreme example of Charles Manson and using psychedelics for brainwashing and violence, which is of course horrible, and which was also done in history. But excluding these, I would say that it's very interesting to really I mean, in today's psychedelic renaissance in the research, it's all around the medical part, the medical side, right? But then lately there's been more of an opening to other sides, maybe the creative microdosing, and of course there's always the more hedonic psytrance or Burning Man side, and you see more and more of these things cropping up and appearing, and to me, I have to say, and I find them all interesting, and I find, if I'm not a purist in that sense, and I know that in the world of psychedelics, as in many other places, we have medical purists, we have spiritual purists, and we have different. We have people that just use them for creativity, and to me, plurality is one of their key aspects, and that's something that I wouldn't want to obliterate from the picture, and that I enjoy seeing around me, and also experiencing for myself.
In your book, you and you have touched on this now with Timothy Leary, making the most extensive studies on the influence of set and setting. In your book, you discussed that Larry's prison experiment failed to show that psychedelics can facilitate lasting change because of the inability of the staff really to support the clients, the prisoners, for a long time after these sessions. And this raises for me the question whether is it really a good idea to create a society in which there are a lot of therapists who are the trained individuals to help you with facilitation of a psychedelic experience? Or is it really the time for family, friends, and basically people supporting each other in integration processes in general to create like a setting in which integration is not in the hands of a few people?
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I would think that, the community setting definitely has its advantages, and it being something that you can return to and integrate also with the community. I think we cannot give up on that. I don't know if that if that negates the possibility of professional therapy, and I think the two are best kind of complementing each other. But if people have these profound experiences, transformative experiences in psychedelic therapy, then obviously it's really important the kind of world they're getting back to later on. And if they're getting back to a non-supportive world, that doesn't understand what they went through, or that just doesn't give them conditions to really realize the kinds of insights that they've gleaned, then in this case, then the potential for true transformation is diminished radically.
This, I think, it links a lot to this the stigma that still exists, right, around psychedelics, because of course you cannot come back to a supportive community if that stigma still exists.
Right. Um, right. And so I think, you know, that's one of the advantages maybe of ayahuasca communities, or like different kinds of communities that have the ability to have a certain discourse or a discussion or conversation happening, that's happening before and after ceremonies, and where people can really decompress. Maybe even Burning Man, or you know, people have this possibility to not just come back to this world where they're to the straight world where they come back and they have to um, they have to conceal this experience or appear normal, because we know also from research, and I discussed this in the book by by Wallace and others, that when people need to conceal this experience, when people need to, when they don't have the chance to really process it, then the chances for negative reactions, or for just for conflict and dissonance are much higher.
We are already discussing for quite some
Yeah, I
time,
think we should. Yeah.
and I would really like to go also more on the topic of meaning and meaning making, but I think that then, you know,
Right.
our time is going to be a bit too long. So maybe we can, maybe we can leave this for another time.
Right.
I think that would be also a very nice discussion. And I would like to end then this this talk by asking kind of like coming back to our status as researchers interested in this topic of how society and psychedelics influence each other. Do you think that is something that we can rigorously study, and how?
Uh, how society sh- shapes psychedelic
Yes.
experiences, and yeah. Well, you know, the word rigorous is really that's so interesting, because it appears, you know, the more rigorous we are, the less interesting maybe the kinds of phenomena that we're allowed to look at in those terms. So I think we're seeing something along these lines happening, and I really enjoyed a paper recently by David Dupois, who also gave a webinar in the conference, and will be talking at the conference, where he's looking at these kinds of things, and really going into the nitty gritty of the ways that he calls it the socialization of hallucination. And so I think there was rigor in that in that research, and it was also quite interesting to read. So I think that's definitely that's another level or another aspect of this challenge that I mentioned before, of bringing these two things together, these two seemingly these separate elements and quite diffuse elements of the subjective experience and of culture, which both of these are so such large and abstract constructs, and trying to create the link. And I imagine, you know, the link will never be super super concrete and direct, and you know, because that's like trying to find the location of thought in the mind. You know, there's I mean, there's level of ambiguity that often remains, and that we cannot completely clear out of the picture, and that will always stay there. But I think we can still reach very instructive insights that can give us meaningful directions to think about these things, and also meaningful directions on how to better our experiences as individuals and as whole societies and cultures.
Because and this question, it was triggered especially by the arguments that you have in the book about, the contrasting results from research that
Mm-hmm.
were so contrasting that it seemed like they were talking about different kind of compounds. But your
Right.
argument was that it was just some kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, how you enter, like the role of the researcher on shaping that experience, and then in the end it kind of like reflects in the outcome. And nowadays, yeah, of course, we want this kind of like rigor, and we are seeing this kind of medicalization and trying to normalize and make psychedelic mainstream by presenting them as part of rigorous scientific research.
Okay. Okay. So perhaps I misunderstood your question in my first take on it. So could you rephrase it? How you're
In the sense that nowadays we are witnessing this kind of strategy to bring back psychedelics into being accepted socially, and we do that by turning to research, because knowledge that comes from
right.
rigorous research is the kind of knowledge that we accept. And we see these, big trials and research programs that try to
Right.
they try to find evidence of how useful they are, and they try to quantify
Right.
in
Right.
different ways this
Okay.
effect.
Right. So first of all, in the book, I look at these different research schools, and that provides for a quite clear picture of how really different kinds of sets and settings created very different, or even contradictory types of experiences with psychedelics. And today, of course, we might be seeing a similar phenomena. And I think this relates to one of the questions that you also sent me in your email, and about how the way that science is conducted shapes experience with psychedelics, or creates models for understanding the psychedelic experience. And I think I mean, that's a big question in science studies, and how science shapes the way we view and understand the world. And so in the past, people understood psychedelics through the prism of shamanism, and the idea that a disease, for instance, is a consequence of some kind of malevolent entity or metaphysical illness, and the shaman would perform some kind of work in the spiritual realm, like extracting a magical dart. And so today we have very different frameworks of thinking about these experiences that contemporary science gives us, and through brain scans or neuroscientific mechanisms. And all of these and these kinds of epistemologies are propagated to the rest of society. And I think we definitely, they create a certain kind of experience. And at the same time, I think we want to keep the possibility to also engage with these experiences, to not have this monochromatic kind of discourse where there's this one dominant discourse that tells everybody how it is and what it is. Because really, if we think about sense setting and how the shaman uses these elements in order to enhance suggestibility, and in order to enhance therapeutic results, then we realize that if we're giving up on these elements, and then we might lose a lot of the therapeutic potential. So really, we wanna have this. We want. So part of the challenge is thinking how to stay true to the scientific principles without giving up on what these older traditions or other frameworks have to offer us. Um, yeah.
To interject there, can psychedelics be a tool for people within the knowledge society to open themselves up to different views, competing theories about their workings of specific things in the world? Like, can it really be a tool for somebody who is creating like a surrounding only about knowledge, and then to open themselves up to new ways of thinking?
Um, can you rephrase, or psychedelics as ways to open yourself up to new perspectives?
Exactly. Especially within the framework of within our surroundings now, that can be completely purely scientific information, for example.
Well, I think, if you follow up on Robin Cards Harris and idea of rebus and relaxed, what's the, I forget the belief, something about relaxing belief systems.
Mm.
But so definitely, I mean, there's this part there that enables you to relax your prior conceptions and access different kinds of perspectives. And I think in our times we also see this in a way that's less sympathetic to many of us, in the rise of what's been called conspirituality, and sometimes this openness to competing narratives that can also become this quite unexamined acceptance, or maybe, but that's a big topic to get into.
That's true.
I actually, I have to go.
Okay. Then let's round this up, perhaps.
Well, definitely so many things that we could talk about, but as I said,
Absolutely.
maybe a different time. Thank you also on behalf of
That was a lot of
JD
fun.
and also our viewers. I hope that they will enjoy our talk, and I am really looking forward to read the next book. When is it going to be?
It's Friday evening.
Okay.
Friday evening. Very nice.
Okay.
See you then.
So much.
Yes. See you then. Bye.
You're staying here though, right? Okay.
If
Hey.